Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where in the world you are, and welcome to the TK show. As you know, we try to get discussions about what's happening pertinently with regards to not only the South African economy, but the continent and the global landscape. Today's guest is really a treat, Ntate Thabang Motsohi. Please, you correct me there if I'm saying it correctly. A strategy consultant. Somebody who, if you follow him on Twitter, yes, he is on Twitter. He is quite vocal on Twitter. Never shy to, I think to get to the nub of what's happening with our country and institutions. Thabang, welcome to the TK show, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm greatly honored.
Yes, and I should also mention he is also an author. I got the pleasure to be able to co-host one of the books he was launching, Fit for Purpose, which I think is a very understated book and is still quite relevant in terms of the many things we're facing in South Africa as regards to institutions and also organizational thinking. That Tabang always make the argument that South Africans, even government, sadly, we like discussing politics, but we always underestimate the value of organization and institutions. And I think your book, Fit for Purpose, really puts that into the center of how we should be thinking about policy, public policy, and also future planning. So if you maybe could just give us a bit of a background just about yourself and how you actually became a strategy consultant and what does that actually mean? Because I think we're used to the title consultant, but not necessarily strategy consultant.
Yeah. Well, look, I think let me start here. Um, I've been exposed to a number of organizations, you know, even globally. I was not in the country until 1994 by choice, by the way. But that gave me an exposure in many ways, having been to Lesotho and having trailblazed, basically become, the head of what you call civil aviation and participated with the International Civil Aviation Organization, in Canada globally. I think more importantly, I was vice president for the African Civil Aviation Commission for Southern Africa for 3 years in the 70s. Now, when I came back, I went straight into Transnet. And within a year, I was asked to do a very difficult task of breaking the Transnet conglomerate into its current standalone operating entities and even install a performance management system, as well as, boards that govern each of those entities. As you may understand, it was a very difficult task, reporting directly to the group CEO, and a very threatening task as viewed by others, because when you unbundle, one of the things that actually happen is that the byproduct of that may be, you know, sizing or resizing the organization in many ways, or restructuring the organizations in many ways. And there are casualties in the process. And therefore, it was not a very, you know, easy choice and an easy job to do. But that gave me a launch and an eye view into, you know, what sort of entities state-owned enterprises are. What was the thought behind their establishment? What was the purpose? And if you look into the history of most of them, they were established by the apartheid government for highly defined specific purposes to serve the interests of the government then, including, for instance, ESCO, which was operating under that government at its best, in its heydays, to be one of the top six in terms of efficiency. So now the question that came to my mind was, uh, as we were entering the democratic phase, did we understand, as the government coming into power then, what our compelling mandate was? from in the new and in the new era compared to the past. Remember, the past was about exclusion and extraction. The majority of black people were excluded in a variety of ways and on many platforms and from many services. And it was also an era of extraction that was even violent, extraction of resources for the benefit of those, of global market, as you now call it, the white monopoly capital. Now, we're entering an era which, by definition, the Constitution has said the public services must be distributed equitably. That is a very fundamental statement, a very challenging statement, because it raises the question, if that is the purpose is that you must deliver public services optimally and equitably. Then it takes you to the next question. What structure do you have to do that? Are you therefore in a state, you might say, fit for the purpose of delivering whatever you are expected to deliver? Remember, these public services run, from education to services at local level, to health, and so on and so on. Now, this question even becomes more relevant because, remember, none of the political leaders who took control in 1994 had any experience in public service or public governance. None of them. And that became a very serious question. And therefore, the second thing is that the resolution that was adopted resulted in the colonist or the conqueror staying in the same place as the people that have now taken power. How do you work around that coexistence? Because it is based on mistrust. You cannot trust the person who has, dominated you for centuries as you get into a new era. Therefore, the question that I'm raising in the title of the book is that, did we understand the mandate, the compelling mandate to do that? And if we did, have we then succeeded in establishing organizations that are fit to meet that mandate, that compelling mandate? My assessment is that we have not, because instead of ensuring that we achieve what you might call, or one might call, a capable state, or a capable state delivery system and machinery, what we have seen is that we have achieved an erosion, a systemic and systematical erosion of the state capability, whether it is in local government or whether it is state-owned agencies and other agencies. That is where the problem has been. Now, how then do you deliver the public services when that is the case? We can spend the whole day discussing about the nature of the collapse and where it has happened in education. Health is a primary example of that. Municipalities are just, for anyone who wants to understand the degree of collapse, read the annual statements of the Auditor General on municipalities. Then you can see that we cannot, therefore, confidently and credibly meet the constitutional obligation of providing equitable public services in an efficient manner. And there lay the problem. Because as I was going through a number of state owned enterprises on advisory services, I found that there was a problem at the top level of articulating purpose and then ensuring that that purpose is understood right through the organization. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you have articulated it, Are you sure that you have the right level of competencies and skills to be able to deliver and achieve the intended outcomes? There lay the things. And therefore, part of the restructuring that was taking place at Transnet was to make sure that we honed in focus on each of these divisions so that they can operate on their own, under their own directly responsible boards that will supervise the activity of each one of them in a focused fashion. And this was the biggest challenge that confronted me. And if you look into the history of ESCO, it was the same thing. But something happened, if you really look back, about 10 years down the line from 1994, we began to see movements at the top levels of organizations. Movements in terms of people that were, deployed or appointed there. It was people that were not competent to be in these organizations. And you just need to peruse the history of appointments of leadership at Transnet, from about 2002. Look at ESCO, look at any other state-owned enterprises. It's a disastrous. PRASA was one of them. Freight rail. Now, this is the question that I think, is most compelling. And it has found relevance now in the current state of affairs of the country, where we find that the worst example of this failure is at municipal level. Now, we do agree, and I think it is understood as well, that local government is where is the coal face of government. That's where things happen. But why is it that we have found it so difficult to get it right there? If you make a tally of interventions that we've made to try to fix local government over the years since 2004 or whatever, there must be about 6 interventions that ended up with something like back to basics and so on and so on. I mean, you can write a thesis on that. It could be a wonderful study for master's program. But each one of them have not moved the needle in terms of what was intended. Why is it like that? And if you look at it, you find that in actual fact, the primary problem was the philosophy of government as we entered 1994. I have now dubbed it in my recent postings that, in fact, the ruling party approached management of South Africa from a party-state paradigm. And if you approach it from a party-state paradigm, then your mindset is that the state must work for the benefit of the parties on top. And you'll recall that the former President Zuma actually stated that in Parliament, that it is the ANC first and then the country after. Now, there comes the confusion. That dichotomy needs to be properly understood. Because as long as you operate like that, then it means even at the municipality level, the appointment of skills will first be on the basis of, or people run, will be first on the basis of loyalty rather than competence. Now, I have been thinking and working on this thing since publishing the book, because what has happened is that, You may have realized that on many occasions on public platforms, politicians will always say, oh, we must make sure that we appoint people that are fit for purpose. This organization is fit for purpose. They have taken the title of the book and used it as a public statement that is devoid of meaning. Whereas the concept, as is described if you go to the website, is a thinking methodology that requires you to bring context to the center when you try to work out, to evaluate, the prospects and performance of an organization. And therefore, the context that municipality is that we have to deliver and meet, public services to meet the expectations of the people. It is as simple as that. But the question is, have we been doing that? Now, are you therefore surprised that the protests at that level systematically increased over time in the past 15 years? And we are at a point now where we realize, the, the public actually decided to make their voice heard on May 29th in a very, very clear manner. The central issue is public services are not delivered to the people. People don't get clean water. People don't get, basic services like health and so on and so on. All of them because we fail to understand the purpose of the entity, which is the municipality. And we fail to also appreciate that it has to be fit in order to deliver to that purpose. I hope I've drawn the link in the little explanation.
No. I think it does. And look, I think that first point you start off with is something maybe it's hardly discussed when it comes to SOEs. What you say, the mandate, or what you say, what's the vision or the purpose for them to be organized. And I like that you were able to tie it to, look, there's a reason why they were set up by the apartheid government. And it would seem as though, excuse me, that discussion was probably never held post 94 to say, listen, what do we want them to do? And I think the second point, which you do bring into it, the democratization of these institutions, which, while noble, again, like you said, it's you must always have the broader mandate. I think the point which you do raise, especially when you bring in the ideas of health and local government, and it's always been, I think I call it a bugbear, which is to say, you the constitution does kind of tell you what they are supposed to do. We understand what health, we understand what local government is supposed to do. But the bigger question you're asking is, are those institutions staffed and set up in such a way? And I think you talked about the deployment of of people. Are they staffed in such a way that it does that? And maybe this is kind of brings me to the principle, I think, of why we're also maybe just talking is, why are institutions or organizations underestimated in South Africa? It's almost as though we just believe that the politics takes primacy. But when I study the Asian countries, when I even study places, the Germans, Weber, for instance, they really believe in the sanctity of institutions. That if you get institutions right, society sort of follows in that regard. Why is that not the case here? That institutions are key in development.
I think you're raising a very important and equally complex question. I would like to reflect on this question from a slightly broader perspective. I've asked myself the question, for instance, why is it that if you take the British colonies, Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland, Kenya, and so on, why is it that in those countries, the transition from the colonial phase into the independent phase was such that it left in place, in most of them, reasonably successful administrations or public administrations to serve the people? Why is it like that? If you take the case of Botswana, which is always, considered to be a star player in terms of how they manage the public service, the transition from when the colony status ended to when the Botswana or the indigenous people totally controlled the public service took some time. In many cases, it was about 10 years or so. And during that time, the posted or the representatives of the of the colonial master were always there to transition, to oversee, to guide, coach, whatever you call it, and as representative of His Majesty's government. At the end, by the time the indigenous people took full control, the level of competency was reasonably high, and therefore that transition was smooth. Now, South Africa really is a very special case in many ways. As I said, the very first characterization of why it is so special is because you are residing in the same territory with the colonizer. It was the first distinguishing case. And the second thing is that you don't trust this colonizer. And therefore you want to replace him as fast as you can in the new administration, which is you're literally throwing out the baby with the bathwater. But could we have retained some under strict control to make sure that the handover, the transfer of skills happens in a progressive, non-disruptive fashion? Perhaps you could have, but under conditions of mistrust, that is a very difficult question to answer. So this question that you asked has, many factors that actually impact on it. And it is one question that I still don't understand, why it is that even 25 years, 30 years up to now, we still fail to understand that we need capable, strongly led organizations to deliver public services in an efficient manner. Now, let's take a simple case of Eskom, for instance. How and why Eskom has suddenly turned around. In 2023, Treasury issued a directive to Eskom and said they are appointing a group of consultants, highly qualified, original equipment manufacturers, specialists from Germany. They came to the country, I think, for about 6 months or just over 6 months. Literally went through every operation of Eskom. And Treasury said their recommendations must be implemented before we can actually, bail out Eskom in whatever form or support. That was last year. And one of the first things, of course, that the last minister did was to appoint a new board, I guess, in preparation for such a situation. Now, the new board came in at the time when this new report was coming out. And it was a very, very detailed, robust report, brave report, that actually basically said you were not managing and running Eskom on the basis of sound business fundamentals. Simple as that, in every aspect. And the board adopted that. Out of that came out the recovery strategy, which then required that new team of leaders ought to be in place. That's how the current team was put in place. And what have they done? They just made sure that they manage the business fundamentals the way they should be. And this is where we are. There is nothing magic that has happened at Eskom. Absolutely nothing magical at all. It is just that you have people and structure that is fit for purpose, systems that have now been reviewed, managed optimally at every level. Generating plans are looked at as entities. with people that are directly responsible as, say, the head of that generation plant, taking decisions at that level. This is why it has come back. And ESCOM actually should be a fantastic case study, in my view, for students of government to see what can happen when you literally, focus on an issue and do the right thing. Now, of course, let's agree that the president as well realized that ESCOM is such a central entity that he had to put it under special focus. Under the the public participation arrangement between between the state and private sector that is consolidated under this advisory, or I just forget the name, whatever it is, group in his office, and appointing also a dedicated minister of electricity to do that. Now, that is how things should be done. If you look at Transnet, Transnet faced also similar problems. We've just replaced, leadership at Transnet about a year ago, right across the board. And things are beginning to happen. Even Professor Havenga of the University of Stellenbosch, who is really putting a lot of focus on, in terms of observing what is happening in Transnet, is expressing a high level of confidence now that things are beginning to change. And they only begin to change because we have the right leadership. And this is why one of the lessons that you find on my website is that Thabang's lessons is organizations don't just self-propel themselves to glory and excellence. They do so because they have the globally competitive, excellent leadership at the helm at all levels. If you get that right, and then you get the governance right, and you leave them alone to do what they have to do, you get the results that we're getting at ESCO. Now, the question is, there is a paradox that I really can't understand. If you look at the way the governing party has been, managing the question of deployment of people that they have confidence in these organizations in the past 10, let's say 10, 15 years, at the head of that organization or that committee within the governing party that takes such decisions was the current president. He was the head of the deployment committee. Now, this is the paradox that I'm trying to point about. He sanctioned appointment of those people that I'm saying were not suitable at Transnet, at ESCO. And yet the expectation was for these two entities to operate optimally. That is a paradox, a self-defeating step. So it goes back to your question then. Have we understood that the state entities and system must be capable, and the institutions that operate under the constitution or as part of the components of a state system must be capable and managed efficiently? Many countries have understood this very well. I spent time, for instance, in Scandinavia. They understand that. If you go to Finland, for example, you look at their education system, they understand that. A teacher in Finland at a primary school level, you'll find teachers that have masters, and they're well paid. It's a highly desirable job that is attracting the best of the quality that they have in Finland. And this is why the teachers are some of the best in the world. A highly qualified, very well paid, highly attractive job. Now, why can't we do the same thing? What is it that stops us to achieve this thing? And if you look at other countries where state aid entities are delivering the best. It's because they are supervised properly from a governance point of view, and they have the right people to do the job. This is the dilemma that we have to cross.
No, I think I think yeah, because as you were speaking, I was thinking of his. I think it's a Daniel or Daniel Amaklu and I think it's Jack Robinson. The book "Why Do Nations Fail?" And
Aha,
he make
yes.
they make the argument that if you look at the difference between America and Mexico, he says, look, as I think you've also pointed out, it's not a racial thing at all. It's just appreciation of institutions and making them work. That
Yes,
the Mexican government over time, post the independence, did not value institutions. And what the Americans
exactly.
did is they valued institutions. And I think you point, and I think this is why we actually wanted to have you on, just that point of people like looking at many different things. I always say South Africans have got this bad habit of they like shiny things. The new shiny thing now is what's
Mm-hmm.
termed the, I call it it's the Grand Coalition, but others call it
Mm-hmm.
the GNU, and they believe, oh, this is a solution. But I think what you've just given us is where is, because when you're reading through the document and you're listening through all the parties, I was looking, what's the value proposition of institutions?
Mm-hmm.
And and this I think I really thought about having you on last week when you raised a point which I think doesn't get said enough, because you raise the paradox of a president is a head of deployment, and the
Mm-hmm.
thinking would be you deploy the best so that you get the good
Exactly.
outcome.
Yes.
But that's not the case. And then obviously you appoint people who are not suitable, you get a bad outcome. You survive one election, but it doesn't mean you're going to survive the next election.
You see,
But then
the
so
paradox, the
yeah, so
paradox,
this
sorry,
paradox is real.
yeah, the paradox goes even further because if you remember last week, the president said, we have to make sure that we appoint the best people to turn the municipalities around. Now, I've underlined that statement from him, and I've asked the question, but Mr. President, you can't turn around municipalities within 2 years. And here is another part of the paradox. The party has decided, the government party has decided that they're going to have a task force that is going to go to the municipalities and try to fix them uh, in time for the local elections in 2026.
Hmm.
Now, as an organizational strategist, I can tell you without, I mean, without even thinking much deeply, it is an impossible task to do. Because to do that, you have to change so many things. There is a policy change that you have to. And that policy change affects how and who you deploy there, under what circumstances. The framework for appointment is easily broken. You have to fix that. Pakistan, I think, is heading that group that will be doing the fixing. And at the same time, you have a program that is intended to professionalize the public service under Professor Somato Tafikeni. Now, part of that program is about really doing exactly what they're talking about. Now, the president talks about under voluntary as well, efforts to make sure that municipalities, are properly run and led. Why do we have so many multifactorial approaches
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
the same problem? Why can't we just have a proper structure that can look at this and put a credible time frame in which the turnaround can be realized? Because we do have municipalities that work very well, but there are others that don't. And key to those that fail to is a combination of issues. It's not only leadership, it is about the budgets, it's about infrastructure investments, and so on and so on. Most of these things that make municipalities fail are procurement linked and infrastructure linked, and this is where the problem is. I recall in 1993, 1923, as the negotiations were going on, there's a professor friend of mine from Uganda who's Uganda, who said to me, Thabang, I can see a very serious problem evolving for the new government. You're going to face a potential, fatal weakness, because of whether or not you're going to be able to manage your procurement budget carefully, because South African public service has an incredibly huge procurement budget. And given the fact that you have people that have no experience in government coming in, who have never worked before, that can be a honey trap. And indeed, it has become a honey trap. There is nothing that we talk about in South Africa that is not working well, that is not linked to procurement breaches in one way or another, especially on infrastructure and projects and tenders and so on and so on.
Yeah.
So this is where the problem is. And my focus on the book is, it's a pity that this is not what you call a fit for purpose, was never considered to be, a book that is going to hit the high waves in terms of attraction to the market, because it is a very intensive book. It's an intense book. It will be attractive to students of public administration, governance, and others, and practitioners of management and leadership in organizations, because to implement it becomes a problem. It is for that purpose now that I've decided to up the game. And I've introduced, and it will be reflected in my website in about 3 weeks or so, a new element called the Fit for Purpose Declaration. What do I mean by that? I'm introducing a concept of a triennial declaration by the leader of an entity, that my entity, the entity that I manage, or of which I'm a chief executive, or of which I'm an executive mayor, or whatever, is fit for purpose. And it is fit for purpose because it meets all the key components of fit for purpose, which are 1, 2, 3, 4. They're identified. And I sign for it. And I make sure that I get co-signature support from the workers. Because one of the things about fit for purpose is that, the purpose must be understood at all levels, the strategy must be understood at all levels, and it must be clear what the targets are, and so on and so on. They must sign for that. And then it must be a public document that we should be able to read and understand from a website. Very simple. And it is clear what it should actually state. Now, why am I doing this? Because I'm actually challenging the leaders of organizations. If you are so confident that you've been appointed correctly, and if you're so confident that you're doing the right thing, then issue this triennial declaration of statement of fit for purpose. Sign it, put it on your website, so that others can actually interrogate it and follow it. Let me give you an example. For a municipality, for instance, if you're so confident about what you're supposed to be doing and how to do it, I challenge the municipality that in their council meetings, there must be no bottled water supplied. Don't supply bottled water. Bring tap water that you provide to the rest of the community into the boardroom. Drink that.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine? Just imagine the implication of this simple test throughout South Africa right now. Which municipalities will confidently drink the water that they supply to the rest of the community?
No, I
for
like
which
that.
they are
I like that.
Which
You're drinking your
municipalities?
own product. Yeah.
This is your product. So let's use it in board meetings. There must be no bottled water, which means you save on budget. Let's go to the tap and let's drink that. Because you said you are fit for purpose, which means you are delivering you know, blue, uh, blue dot, qualifying water to the people. It is a constitutional mandate. I'm not asking for something new that has to be invented. I'm asking for something that has always been there. It is for people who are qualified to deliver it. So why can't we do that? Why can't we adopt that? So this is the thing that I'll be posting now in the next 2 weeks or so, and I'll definitely send you a copy of this to look at. But it's a statement that I think we should now move into, because it'll then stop this thing of talking about glibly and loosely about fit for purpose on public platforms. People must be able to put their names behind the organizations they lead. If you're so confident about the organizations, do it. I think if you take this test, for instance, that I'm talking about, and give it to ESCO, the chairman of ESCO will easily sign such a statement, or the CEO of ESCO will easily sign such a statement to say that yes, we're delivering now. We don't have load shedding anymore, and so on and so on. That's the next step that we have to get our organizations to. Now, the question that I asked, can you imagine the state president insisting that heads of organizations and the government must sign a declaration every 3 years of fit for purpose, a declaration of assurance that my organization is fit for purpose? And I'm suggesting 3 years deliberately, because some corrective measures can take time.
Yes, yeah.
And where you are not able to say, I am currently fit for purpose, then you must also declare that I have the following corrective remedial measures to do in the next 24 months, whatever, to be able to do that. Then we know what you're doing.
No, I think that's perfect. I actually love the bit you're saying there about working it backwards. One, giving time, because
Yes.
you're right. A lot of initiatives from the presidency and other institutions, they never give time. It's almost, and if you don't give time, you're simply wishing. So I like that you say, look, here's a reasonable time time scale. We're not saying we're going to sort everything out, but at least 3 years is enough for us to see, like you say, corrective measures. And then there's two, which I think is a big one, which is test your product. Because at the end of the day, you, why do you wake up? Why are you earning a salary at the end of the month? It must be because your product is superior, or in line with, let's say, the public sector, your product is delivering, or when you put the issue of water. So no, I think that's no, I think it's something which is very much needed, and I would really support that and be very happy to see that. But there's a point you raise, and I'm going back to what piqued my interest when I said, oh, when I was speaking to the producer Ludwig, is there's a tweet you sent out, and it's very much, I'd have to say, it's a characteristic of this president and his presidency.
Mhm.
The belief in, I'll call it, it's not sustainable methods of how you address problems. Operation Vulindlela,
Mhm.
which I think people have praised it to the moon and back, but from a policy perspective, my critique has always been, but and I think you've partially touched on it a lot, which is to say you can't make you can't set up one area of government and say it's excellent without understanding the fact that you simply are hiding the fact that the whole of a government is not working. And you can't just make this one entity to be the sole thing when you're supposed to say, listen, you're meant to make the whole of government work.
Yeah.
And I did like your tweet about it, because I think you raised something which many people are very maybe it's because they don't understand strategy in the same way you do, but I call it a false bravado of Operation Vulindlela, which for me is a tacit, if not explicit, uh, recognition that this government has failed. Because if you're praising an entity like Vulindlela, when what you're simply saying is we don't have the necessary skill and ability to fix the problems that Vulindlela has been identified to fix, and we're simply just gonna put it into a certain entity within government, which we really don't know what's happening. It's a black box of sorts. Yeah, so I just wanted to maybe get your thoughts on it, because I think I find it very worrying, this Operation Vulindlela. as regards to proper public sector reform, which is what I think you're speaking about.
You're raising a very important, factor, actually. Yes, indeed, I did, post quite extensively about this Operation Vulindlela thing. And I think there's one writer who wrote a pretty good piece on it. I think it was Carol Payton. My discomfort with Operation Vulindlela stems from the following. It was established as a fixer type of strategy. We're fixing something that we see is wrong there. So we're taking it out of where it should be, and we're putting it, housing it in the presidency, next to the authority of government, next to the apex of decision-making in government. We're moving it from that place where it is far away from government under a particular minister. Now, what are you saying by doing that? You're saying that minister there has failed to achieve the national interest on this aspect of the activity. And therefore, we shall remove that and place it under the presidency so that we can bring it close to decision making. And then we shall bring in resources from outside, some of which I suppose are paid for by the private sector, that are going to help do this thing. Now, we don't see that. We don't see that. How many resources are put there? What type of resources? How are they funded? And so on, because that is opaque. Now, when you remove such a responsibility from a particular department, what happens to the resources that are left there? Are they now becoming redundant? Or are they being reschooled by your School of Governance, for instance, to optimize their skills? What actually happens there? For how long are you going to keep on doing that? Going to essential areas in health, in infrastructure, and any other, or education, and intervene in that fashion. Because you are literally confirming that delivery as expected in the national interest by that department has not met expectations. Or in fact, it is below par. And therefore, we shall bring it closer to the apex of decision making. And I like to use that word because that's what everybody will want it to be. Because these guys are just next door to his office. They can go in and say, Mr. President, I want this. And then he says, yes, go ahead and do it. And remember, as I said, my understanding is that some of the people that are funded there are funded by the private sector. So you can easily do things. You can accelerate implementation or execution. You can take corrective decision just like that in 24 hours. But that action should be replicated or actually done in the department from which this entity has been taken. So this type of approach is not new. It has been done. In the UK too, it has been done before. Mexico is one of those where it was done. But you cannot use it as a permanent solution because of the following. Ramaphosa only has the next 5 years and is out permanently. The next person that comes in may not share the same ideas about how to manage weaknesses in state entities and departments. You're going to get disruptions. You're bound to get disruptions. You're bound to get, interruptions. So why not make sure that you have special vehicles that go into the department, fix the problem in situ, in the department, so that the lessons are left within the organization, and people that are in the organization are empowered properly, and they have a different way of doing things. I think we are attaching too much importance too much expectation to this intervention of Operation Vulindlela. It was necessary, I must say, for instance, in the case of ESCOM, but it should be what you call time limited.
Exactly.
ESCOM right now doesn't need it. I dare say Transnet may not necessarily need it. What you need to do in Transnet is make sure that the private sector participation that has been talked about, that has been programmed, is rolled out as fast as possible. The infrastructure upgrading and the overhaul and replacements that must take place does take place. We are not doing that as well as we should. Make sure that you get a very, very, very highly experienced board to guide, these entities. So I'm a bit uncomfortable about this Operation Vulindlela, because you see, the other thing about it is that as it achieves progress, the temptation to add more to it will become sharper and increase, and you'll end up with an over bloated state presidency. And this is why now in Parliament there are calls to say, no, you need a special cabinet, a special committee of Parliament to focus on accountability in the office of the presidency.
No, and I think it's a very valid point you raise, because I think many people don't quite understand it from that side, which is to say, it's not unique, but I love the way you put it, that it's a special vehicle. I think the Japanese, what's the term they use? Just-in-time management. It's a form of
Yes,
just-in-time management, where you do this, it's out. But the critical thing, which I think you're raising and many other people are missing, is the fact that it's almost as though you are further undercapacitating the larger state. Because like you said, had this thing been done to say, listen, how do you bring up those ministries? And I guess maybe one of the, probably as we head towards the last closure, which we probably need to touch on, is the issue of maybe the reason why they can't do that is they've not even touched on the critical idea of how have we designed government. My argument, I think you know it very well, is we have too many ministries and too many ministers, which, going back to your original point, is we've never asked the question, why do you have a ministry? You're right in saying foreign affairs, the world over, you need foreign affairs. We all know what that looks like. Now, its form and structure is different. The Brazilians put foreign affairs with industrialization because it answers their national critical question. So I think you always need a Ministry of Finance, because you need to show that you've got the ability to read the books and make sure that you know where money is going in and out of the state. You can have a presidency or prime ministership. But the others, you're right. And again, it goes back to the first point you raised of what is the purpose. So I think many people are sleeping on what you've said about Vulindlela, which is to say, one, it's further undercapacitated what is a weak state. And two, it's running away from the critical thing of why have we not had the discussion about why our ministries are really failing?
You see, this thing of Vulindlela, I would like to say, we must be very careful. It can be a very intoxicating thing if we're not careful about it. Now, you raise, another key issue, as you say, as we're winding up. The question of how do you structure government must follow purpose. In the book, I talk about that. The next step after vision or mandate or purpose is structure, operating structure, to achieve the objectives, the vision that you have in mind with the purpose of this organization or the strategic intent. I've used other words like, the value proposition that you have in establishing an organization. What is it that you're trying to achieve? I've raised this question because in 2012, a report was published, by the Presidential Commission on Public Enterprise that looked into this question of state-owned enterprises and and so on, and why and for what purpose they were established. There was supposed to have been a follow-up with that that looks into why this one, why that one, why the other, and what should we do about them. which is exactly what I did in Transnet, in trying to set up these organizations as separate entities. Why that? What is the specific purpose? And what then must it do? What type of people do you require there? What type of board do you require to do that? We need the same attitude and approach in looking at government. Following or on the basis of the Constitution, 1996 Constitution, what kind of government structure do we need to achieve the objectives of the Constitution as we have? Yes, we came with the three separations we need. Parliament, we need provincial, we need local.
Mm.
And so three spheres of government. But how do we then take it further to break down at the micro level? What do we mean by that? For example, we came with the concept of the Department of Public Enterprises some years ago. It was supposed to be a temporary affair, where all the state enterprises will be housed in, as we consider what to do with them in terms of repositioning them and redefining their purpose in the new democratic era versus the apartheid era.
Mm.
We got carried away by that, and then we had a minister, then we had a teacher, and the whole thing was losing purpose. I'll give you an example. SAA, which I was advising in 2018, responsible to the Department of Public Enterprises, also answering to Treasury. You cannot change your, your operations or buy engines and stuff like that without getting permission from Treasury and approval from public enterprises. I mean, this is a business that is active, for which decision making is a competitive advantage. You must be able to respond to market shifts and movements in an instant. You require the luxury of making decisions on the run. And therefore, if you're in such an organization and you're unresponsive, you get lost, you get taken over. In Ethiopian Airways, for instance, that I worked with for over 6 months in the 70s, they respond to market changes just like that in a meeting, and action is taken. But you see, they also went through a similar problem of isolating themselves from government. I think it was 1983, when the government decided we've had enough of these subsidies and losses. Now, they brought in some retired general, Air Force general, to get the thing right. And he said, okay, I'll do it, but I have conditions. The first condition is that I don't want interference from you. I don't want any one of your ministers even getting close to the fence around which we work. I don't want to see you there. I don't want to have a call. I'll meet with the minister once in 6 months. Government went ahead. They thought about it. They said, okay, fine. We'll give you the freedom. But don't come back to us and ask for subsidy. He said, no, that's what I want. And he never did. Ethiopian Airways is funded from the market, from the bond market, for everything that they do, everything that they have done. Aircraft purchase, procurement, etc. When Ethiopian Airways announces that they're planning a fleet improvement and so on, the funders literally camp in Addis Ababa to come and present themselves. All right? All Ethiopian Airways has to choose who is the most suitable. That's how viable the business has become by being, independent, running the operation, on sound business principles and at minimum cost, because government insisted you must operate at the lowest cost possible. It is a mantra they've kept since 1983. This is what I'm talking about defining the purpose of an organization. Now, Ethiopian government defined the purpose of Ethiopian Airlines. It said, we will not fund you, but you're going to run it at the lowest operating cost possible. period. That's all we shall measure. Every 6 months, we want to see that. We needed to do that here. We needed to revisit each one of the enterprises and ask the same question. What is the purpose in the new era, democratic era, given the, the vast expanse and diversity of the country? What type of entity? How should it be run? Then there was a proposal, for instance, about how to establish the boards, etc., etc. We now have a new development, which is a good progress in that direction, of a state company that is supposed to house everything else. But the major fault of it, that I've pointed out even in my post, is that the hand of the minister is still there. There lies the problem. Whereas the proposal that I have in the book, and that has been stated before, is that there must be a nationwide search for capable people whose profiles shall be kept and on a database from which you can then draw as to who do we want to appoint on the board of this and that and the other, because of their expertise and what they can contribute. And the identification, selection of these people must be public, so that we have this database. Then you should have no problem about the type of people that you appoint to the boards of ESCOM or Transnet or State Forest, whatever company, PRASA, and so on. We need to revisit this question of structure.
Yeah.
State, its agencies, and institutions, as to whether they are relevant to the context as we have it in the new democratic era. It's an exercise that should have been done 10 years ago. It must be done. And we can take this thing, segmentally. State-owned enterprises, we come to the government, and then we look at municipalities. Because there is absolutely no question about it. Some municipalities do not have to exist.
Yeah.
And, let's answer. This is the way I think we should look at things. And this exercise will be answering a very simple question that I've referred to already. Make sure that we have entities that are fit for purpose. It's as simple as that. And I'll keep on harping on this.
No, I think, I think this is why we also wanted to have you on, because I think it kind of takes the discussion away from the theorization of policy to, look, I think with what you call the fit for purpose declaration, it's practicality at its simplest, which is to say, this is your product, test it, and once again, always revise, because I think there's this idea that failure and success, only happen once in a while, but in truth, they should always be revisited. When you're doing well, it's a great time to revisit why you're doing well. If you're not doing so well, it's a good time to get into the room and in the boardroom. And I think this is why I really did want to have a discussion with you, because I think you're one of the few people, or I guess owing to the fact that practically, from a strategy experience-wise, and also from a theorization perspective, you've put this down on paper. And I would again suggest people go look for your book. What we are going to do on our side is we are also going to put your website on our page as well, so people can literally go see what you have been discussing, because I think we're at a period and point where, look, South Africans, and I think I would even say the region requires solutions. We're not saying all solutions are going to work, but I'd always say I'd rather go with a well thought out solution which fails, because it basically means there's a methodology, you can go back and see why it failed, than to do what we're currently doing, which is to shooting in the wind and hoping something changes. So maybe just your last thoughts, what you would want to leave us with, and what you would encourage those people who want to get into strategy, or governments or entities which really do want to change things. What would your parting shot be?
Really, the simple thing really is that, strategy is not about theorizing it. It's about understanding the context. It's about asking the question about purpose, and it's about working out exactly how we are going to achieve that purpose, and the strategic objectives that are put in place to achieve it. And then answering the biggest question of it all, which is structure. What structure do you put in place to do the work? And how are you resourcing that structure from a manpower or skills and competency perspective, as well as funding perspective? And on top of that, how do you ensure that governance is in place to guide you? That is the thing. And all of this you'll find under the declaration of fit for purpose that will be showing up in my website, in the next week.
No, thank you so much, Thabang Motsohi, for your discussion. And I have to say it was an enlivened one because it's practical. It's to the point. It's things you have experienced, things you've turned around because of the institutions you've worked with. And hopefully we can also just follow this up a bit, because I did like the fact that you said, listen, from the 1970s, you've seen institutions like Ethiopian Airways go from being a basket case to a world leader. And I think these are the types of conversations which should be infiltrating our media and also higher education, because at the end of the day, we should be in service of solutions. And I do like the way that you've done it. Thank you so much for your time. And that will probably put an end to the TK show for now. We are hoping that this is the types of discussions I think should be part of the mainstream of media. Questions about how do we get this country and the continent better from a practical experience. We thank Thabang for just giving us his time. And we thank you for just listening in to the TK show. Until next time, let's really be avid about making sure that we do make this country and this continent work from an economic and a policy perspective. So thank you for your time, and see you next time on the TK show.
Thank you so much.
That's right, I'm wearing red. I did that very deliberately to try and capture your attention instead of my usual black. I did that because I've got quite an important and very exciting, for me at least, announcement, and that is that our new book, Rescuing Our Republic, which has been written in conjunction with my friends and colleagues at Discourse ZA, is now out and about in bookstores across South Africa and available online for anyone else that is curious about South Africa. And as I've said before, as a futurist and a trained analyst and economist, I do think that South Africa is one of the clearest bellwethers as to where the weird Western world is headed. And as such, there's something you can learn from us at the bottom of Africa. We're ahead of quite a few of the trends that you're just wrapping your heads around. Anyway, this book is based on some of our most popular and most revealing, interesting, and important conversations that we've had over the last couple of years at Discourse ZA, which is a YouTube channel you should absolutely subscribe to. It's also available as a podcast if you're interested in anything to do with politics, philosophy, and economics. But the conversations in this particular book are focused on, as the title says, rescuing our republic, or more specifically, what civil society and individuals should be thinking about and doing and starting if they are interested in investing in a future for South Africa that we actually want to be a part of. Anyway, I would love for you to read this book and to give it to someone either that you like or that you hate, because the purpose of this book is to kickstart conversations around big, interesting, ugly even, but important ideas that are worthy of debate. So if you're planning on being bored or understimulated at a family or friend event this festive season, this is the book you need to give you the conversation starters to start a debate or a fight with those who you love or love to hate most.